This is a re-recording of Sunday's message due to audio difficulties. And we are continuing our series. We're on the mountain and the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus. And we come to perhaps one of the most challenging parts of Jesus' message from Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. The word that is translated resist in this passage is a term in the Greek language that often refers specifically to violent resistance. Throughout the Old Testament, we find that this term is specifically referencing military action, such as when ancient Israel would resist an enemy in battle. In the New Testament, other words related to the term are references to violent revolts, insurrections, war of that type. And the first century Jewish historian Josephus almost always used the term in ways that suggested some sort of violent action. So when Jesus tells his followers not to resist an evil person, he is using a word that suggests violent resistance. In fact, N.T. Wright, in his translation of this verse, puts it this way: don't use violence to resist evil. Put simply, when Jesus says, do not resist the one who is evil, he is specifically prohibiting using violence to resist evil. Jesus then fills out his command with examples of what he is getting at when he is talking about non-resistance. This is what non-resistance that Jesus is talking about may look like. You offer the other cheek when someone slaps you on the right cheek. You let a person who sues you for your shirt have your cloak as well. You go 2 miles with someone who forces you to go 1 mile. You give to the one who asks you. And you don't turn away from someone who wants to borrow from you. These 5 statements by Jesus define what he means when he says, do not resist an evil person. And each one of them, and this is important, covers a different area of life. Jesus takes this do not resist evil command, and he scatters it across all of our life, just as we are called to do. So you have the first situation that deals with physical attack, and the second situation then deals with what we might term legal attack. The third situation is even tougher. It pertains to political oppression by a foreign army. And the fourth and fifth situations deal with unpleasant financial scenarios. And so Jesus gives this range of examples of not resisting evil and what that looks like in terms of physical attack, social shame, legal injustice, political oppression, and economic hardship. And in every situation, the principle of retaliation is unconditionally rejected. If someone does something bad to you, Jesus says, it's wrong for you to say, look, this person did something bad to me, and I want to do something bad to this person because of this. In fact, we are exhorted to give up completely that desire to do bad things to someone who offends us, to someone who attacks us, to the person, the evil person. And so as a Jesus follower, I am called to not want to do anything bad to someone who does something bad to me. And Jesus actually goes a little further here. That may make us a little more uncomfortable or find his words a little more challenging. Because when he uses that image of turning the other cheek, it suggests that not only am I determined that I'm not going to retaliate in any way, but also that I am communicating to the individual, the evil person, that I am resolved that I am not going to take retaliation. That image of turning the other cheek implies not only the absence of retaliation or revenge, but also an active message of non-retaliation, a message that sets the scene for the examples that follow, which take us even further into what Jesus has to say. It's not enough to repay an attacker in kind. It's not enough to give up retaliation altogether. It's not enough to express your complete lack of bad intentions. Jesus says we need to go further. We need to go so far as to repay evil with good. In other words, I want to do or I do something good for the evil person. For example, to use Jesus' examples, one should give the evil person your coat in addition to the tunic or shirt taken by force. You go with the person another mile, possibly even carrying a burden for him or her as well. Challenging words. I do want to highlight something here that's important, though, and that is that Jesus is not suggesting total submission to the unjust demands of an evil person. We are not to become doormats. We are not to just subject ourselves to all sorts of violence and insults just because we follow Jesus. What Jesus urges is that I should not do bad things to other people because these people have done something bad to me. Now that's a critical difference, and I want to illustrate it with a hypothetical example. And that's someone attacks your children. What Jesus is saying here is that one should not deliberately do bad things to the attackers because they have done something bad to your children. But that doesn't mean that you submit to the attack. It doesn't mean that you just let the attacker go after your children. It doesn't mean that you refrain from resisting the attackers. There's a world of difference between wanting to do something bad to people and resisting what they're doing, trying to protect your children. A world of difference between wanting to do something so that these people can't do bad things to my children and wanting to do something bad to the attackers because they have done something bad to my children. I hope you catch that nuance there. There's a difference between wanting to do something so that people can't do bad things to me or my children and wanting to do something bad to the attackers because they've done something bad to me or my children. That's the difference between wanting to stop the attackers and wanting to pay them back. It's all tied up in this idea of self-defense. Self-defense is to do something to the other person, not necessarily bad. For example, you may knock a weapon out of the attacker's hands. But in retaliation, my intention is to do something bad to this person. Secondly, in self-defense, the intention is to prevent someone from doing something bad to me. Whereas in retaliation, my intention is to pay back, to get revenge, to do something bad to this person. In retaliation, the triggering thought is, this person did something bad to me. And in self-defense, the triggering thought is, I know that this person wants to do something bad to me, and I'm going to stop that person from doing something bad to me. So what do you think? Does Jesus allow for self-defense, even as we are called to turn the other cheek and go the extra mile? The clarity and the decisiveness of the interpretations of Jesus' words in the rest of the New Testament is somewhat, I think, reflective of the seriousness that Jesus' first followers gave to these words in the Sermon on the Mount. So, for example, we read from Paul's letter to the Romans, do not repay anyone evil for evil, or don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And when he writes to Thessalonica, make sure that nobody pays back wrong for good. And Peter, in his letter, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. And certainly from the opening verses in 1 Peter, and to indeed with many of the Christians that Paul is writing to, we know that they were facing persecution in various ways, of violence, attacks by evil people because of their faith. This passage is, I think, a watershed when it comes to how we live out the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus invades every sphere of our lives, and he demands cross-shaped behavior that is outrageous, that is confounding. And he doesn't offer us little compartments of life where we can respond to evil in whatever way we want. The examples he provides, as I have tried to point out, cover all aspects of our lives as followers of Jesus. And so these words of Jesus here in the Sermon on the Mount really stand up, so to speak, on the page of our Bibles as we're reading them. And they stare at us in their rugged vision. And when Jesus gets to the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, and he gives the little story or parable about the wise man and the foolish man, the wise person builds their house on the rock, and the foolish person builds their house on the sand. And he is encouraging us to be the wise person who follows and does everything that he's talked about in the sermon. So he expects that his followers will take up these words and live them out regardless of the cost. Jesus summons us here to live in our world with what has been described as the moral imagination of the kingdom of God. And these expressions, this moral imagination, are not so much impractical as they are counter to our culture. And I can't help but think that as I read through the Sermon on the Mount, that's the point of Jesus' words over and over and over again. They were counter to the culture of his day, and they remain counter to the culture of our day. Robert Frost wrote a poem in 1945 called A Mask of Mercy, and he characterized the Sermon on the Mount with these words: a beautiful impossibility, an irresistible impossibility, a lofty beauty no one can live up to. Yet no one can turn from trying to live up to. That last line, no one can turn from trying to live up to the Sermon on the Mount, reflects the sense that Jesus' sayings in this passage are not meant to be impossible to live up to. And this intuition demands that we continually search and discern how the Sermon on the Mount can be relevant on earth and not only in heaven.